Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy here for the Daily Blob as we say, I wonder if this is how the Europeans felt about 100 years ago. So I've been talking a lot about the anti-China sentiment by the politicians here in the United States. I've got to say, I actually don't hear this much anti-China crap from actual American citizens. I don't know, maybe there's something in the water in Washington, D.C., but there's just a whole bunch of we gotta hate China. Right? The American people have to hate China because China is the enemy. Why is China the enemy? Because they've always been the enemy. And if you question that, then you're in a Chinese shill or something of the sort. Anyways, I've talked lots and lots about the anti-China policies that our federal government is undertaking and how asinine and stupid I think most of those policies are. And I think one of the most interesting things about these policies is just how much China doesn't seem to give a damn. What happens when you tell the other side to stop? And then the other side doesn't even pay attention to you? Doesn't even seem to recognize that you're talking to them. Stop! You need to stop what you're doing. And they're too busy doing what they're doing to pay attention to you. So anyways, the big thing going on right now is that we in America feel that we have the right to say how far the Chinese society should be able to progress technologically, right? Basically, our politicians have been brainwashed into the idea that AI is more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Ergo, they have to protect AI the way they would protect nuclear weapon secrets. Ergo, China is not allowed to get a lot of this technology. Again, the AI, what we call the AI diffusion rules, so they're not able to access a lot of GPUs and a lot of the AI type technology. And then other companies such as Huawei are basically under embargo for getting processors and other chips and things. And one of the things I've talked about for a while now is that if the United States wanted to pull this crap against Kenya or Vietnam or, France or any other third world country, that it would probably work. It would probably work. What the hell is Vietnam going to do? Like, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. But if we want to fuck with Vietnam, right. Actually, I should be careful with Vietnam. They can fuck back too. Anyways, all I'm saying, there's a lot of places in the world that if you start screwing with them, right, it would be a big problem. The thing is with China, right, China has at least 4x the population that we do. They're the second largest economy in the world. They are the quote-unquote factory of the world. They're called the factory of the world for a reason. And so when the United States says you should stop, they don't necessarily care. And the question is as they progress forward, at what point are they simply going to destroy any economic advantage that we currently have, right? The idea that we're the front runners in AI, the idea that we're the front runners in certain technologies, basically if we lock them out of those industries and they decide to not be locked out of those industries, what happens when they just produce their own homegrown technology and just move forward faster and better than we do? Again, as we've seen with price of products, with quality of products, with scale of production, they can just do things that you simply cannot do in the United States, right? So they've been making a lot of money off of creating iPhones and Android devices and all that kind of stuff, and then buying CPUs and GPUs and the silicon, this high-value silicon from us, because it just wasn't worth their time. Again, the option wasn't worth their time to develop it and build it themselves. They might as well make more money off of selling iPhones than going through the whole rigmarole of producing their own processors. Well, again, you've got to do the options, whatever options you have in life. If you can no longer buy silicon from the United States, from the Western world, you're going to start producing yourself. And then again, once you start looking at the scale, the speed, and the quality of Chinese goods, again, the question becomes is if we are, let's say for a second that we are 5 years ahead of China currently, theoretically, right? It's only 2025. That's only pushing it back to 2020. Think about GPUs and CPUs and electronic equipment in 2020. That's not that bad, to be honest with you. But anyways, let's just say they're 5 years behind. The question is at the speed they're developing things, how soon until they're 5 years ahead? How soon until they're selling better AI products at half the price? And again, this is why I come here to scream. This isn't pro-China policy. China got a lot of issues. Again, a lot of China man out there be like, oh yeah, America sucks. China good. Like, no, I'm not saying China good. I'm just saying I wish our politicians would stop screwing our own country. Let China deal with China problems. Let America deal with America problems, right? Let China figure out how to keep 1.4 billion people trying to go in a particular direction, and let America build some hospitals. You know what I would love to see out of Trump? Hospitals. But anyways, we're not going to get hospitals. The curious thing is with this whole process, I talk about the dominoes. Now, things don't happen at one period of time. Again, when we talk about the Great Recession, now it gets all condensed into like Bear Stearns fell and everybody started screaming for their lives. And as I've talked about, now as Bear Stearns fell, then there's problems in the property market and right? It was a 2-year disaster. Like just the process of the Great Recession before we got out of it, it was about a 2-year process. Again, even when we talk about something like 9/11. Right? You talk about 9/11 and people's minds fixate. 2001, the 11th of September. That is 9/11. And again, that's not real. I mean, 9/11 was 9/11 because obviously it happened on that particular day. But no, you had 9/11, and then you had the response to 9/11, and then you had the war that started in Afghanistan because of 9/11. That was back all going into October, so it's like a month or two later. Then we go into Afghanistan. Then it was long time life because I was in Sri Lanka when we went into Iraq. So we're talking about like 9-10 months later. Then we go into Iraq. Then we have the longest war in American history, and then we have another stupid war. And again, like even September 11th, even though that is actually something that functionally happened on one particular date, the whole thing that is September 11th, like when you think about September 11th as this thing, again, that was probably another year or two of events before you got onto the crap show that was after, right? So these events happen. And so that's one of the things I think is interesting right now is I talk about how China is going to advance past us in the technology world and the ramifications of that. And so many times when we talk about this, people are expecting like one processor to come out, right? So there's Huawei's AI processor that just came out, and Trump is now trying to make it illegal for anybody else in the world to buy. Because that's the insanity of the President of the United States. The President of the United States literally believes he has the authority, not just in the United States, but to tell anybody in the world that they cannot buy a particular product because one of the engineers at Huawei caught out of their corner of their eye an American product description. Ergo, we have control over whether or not you can buy an AI processor. Which is absolutely insane, right? Give me liberty or give me death is what was banged into our heads. That doesn't sound like fucking liberty to me. But anyways, what the hell do I know? I'm only a veteran who comes from a family of veterans. I thought we were supposed to be defending the Constitution, and we now have a president of the United States that isn't so sure on that fact, right? Can you imagine that? The head of the United States military, right? The commander-in-chief of the U.S. military literally isn't so sure if it's really his responsibility to defend the Constitution. Again, you vote for whoever you want to vote for, but this is a sick, senile old piece of shit, in my opinion. Anyways, but the process to take us from supreme society to inferior society is not something that will happen in one moment. I'm sure 30 years from now, there will be the 9/11 moment. There will be the Huawei moment. This is the moment that Huawei created the singularity. And we'll all remember that day in 2026 at the rate we're going. And we're going to think it's like that's when it happened. But again, it's going to be this whole process. And that's what I think is interesting right now with Xiaomi, right? So Xiaomi is one of the smartphone manufacturers in China. It is not blacklisted, at least in the same way that Huawei is blacklisted, but they're running into their own issues. Again, the thing with Xiaomi that is interesting is they create pads, iPad, tablet devices. They create smartphones, and I do believe that they just created their first car. Right? And so basically they need processors and all of that kind of thing. And so basically they're going down the route of producing their own processors. And so at this point in time, they're coming out with a new processor that they say is cheaper than the iPhone processor with better performance. Now again, in the smartphone world, what does that mean? Again, just like I say, if we say that China is 5 years behind with silicon, let's just say, right? Again, is a 2020 computer really that bad? It's like, oh no, we shall suffer through 2020 computers. Again, one of the things to be thinking about with this is you know, with the specific numbers. Again, the charts, right? When I look at Gamers Nexus, I just watched another Gamers Nexus video today. Oh my God, what the fuck is wrong with you people? It's like 20 minutes of spreadsheets. Anyways, now you see all these spreadsheets or whatever, but the question is what doesn't matter in the real world? And one of the things I'd argue with this is whether or not the Xiaomi's chip is quote-unquote better than the current run of the Apple chips isn't the most significant thing. The most significant thing here is that they are now competitive at a lower price point today. So, again, it then goes into the question, where will they be 6 months from now? Where they'll be a year from now? Where will they be 5 years from now? It's kind of interesting to take a look at and look at the design process and then think about where all this is going to be working out in the future. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is from CNBC. China's Xiaomi claims new phone chip rivals Apple at a cheaper price. All right, so they come out with their new processor, what it's called, the XRING 01 chip, that is supposed to be better than the iPhone 16's chip. Chinese smartphone company Xiaomi is taking on Apple's iPhone with an advanced chip and a cheaper phone. Xiaomi is winning the battle on the pricing of its latest phone. The new Xiaomi 15S Pro starts at 5,400 yuan, $764, and is significantly cheaper than Apple's models containing the company's most advanced phone chip. The iPhone 16 Pro starts at 8,000 yuan, while the iPhone Pro Max model begins at about 10,000 yuan. And Xiaomi CEO Li Jun claims his company also has a competitive chip, saying at a launch event on Thursday that Xiaomi's new XRING 01 beat Apple's A18 Pro on several technical metrics, including the ability to operate a game with less heat. Wow. You can play more games on their phone. But I think the interesting thing, though, is that this is Xiaomi's XRING 01 processor competing against Apple's processor. And so this is on the ARM architecture. Or it's using the ARM processors. We'll talk about that in a second. And so it becomes an interesting thing. Again, when you start looking at the quality and the performance of the products that the Chinese market is putting out, that they're already competitive with what are supposed to be, you know, the best devices we have for sale. Quote from Li, Apple is still number one, Li said in Mandarin, according to CNBC translation. He said the XRING 01's performance should not be seen as an attempt to pressure Apple, rather as an indicator of the great effort Xiaomi made to develop a comparable processor. And this is also something to be a little bit concerned about. Like, what happens when the tide of history just starts pulling in a direction? And there's so much force behind it, basically everything gets dragged in a way, right? In the United States, we think a lot about competition, right? The idea is the only reason a company should build a better product or a cheaper product is that if something else is competitive on the market, ergo, in order to retain or increase market share, they have to either come up with something better or something cheaper. The only reason to improve the quality or price of your product on the American side is because of competition. We're really 110% behind competition. One of the things I've talked about a lot is if you go around the world and you actually sit down and you listen to other people, don't talk, ask a question and shut the fuck up, right? Have you watched my interviews? What do? I generally ask a question and shut the fuck up, right? So you can actually listen to what the other person is saying. One of the interesting things is when you go around the world, the rest of the world isn't necessarily fixed on this whole competition idea. Right? Again, they're more or less with it. I mean, most people don't disagree with the overall concept of competition, but the degree that America takes it to does get to be a little bit stupid. I think most Americans would agree with that too. And so what becomes interesting, right? What happens when you have an American market, an American mindset within the American industry? Again, we talk about intent. Intent drives what's going to happen. Intent drives what is going to occur. And so if all we're worried about here is competition, what happens when another society, again, is in the technology world, right, and they're dealing with their intent and their motivations, and what happens when their motivations is simply to move the ball forward, right? If I say I'm only going to move the ball forward when I'm required to move the ball forward in order to make $1, right? That's going to lead to an outcome. That's going to lead to an outcome. What happens if you have another society that says we're going to move the ball forward because we just think balls should go forward? Right? Again, like think about it in our society, right? The difference between like an employee and a startup founder, right? An employee does work because they're getting paid by the hour. A startup founder does work because they're fucking insane. Right? There's a different motivation. Right? And that's why, again, if you're going to be a startup founder, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, right, you can work whenever you want. Whatever 12 hours of the day you want to work, you have the freedom to work those 12 hours a day and possibly lose a shit ton of money. Again, most employees don't work 100 hours a week and lose tens of thousands of dollars at the exact time. I've done that one before. Oh, it sucks. Anyway, so what becomes interesting here is if you have the American mindset that you only move the ball forward because of competitive pressure, and you have the Chinese mindset that says, man, we're just going to move the ball forward because we think balls need to be moved forward, who do you think is going to end that race and win that race at the end of the day? Right? And so it becomes interesting. Again, like when you take a look at this and we take a Xiaomi and look at the CEO, and basically the idea here is that they have a processor at this point in time that is theoretically competitive with the iPhone processor at a cheaper price point. And the curious thing here is that they're not trying to fight Apple whether or not Apple's number one. They're like, yeah, Apple's number one. Apple is still number one. We're not even going to argue with that. We're just going to keep pushing our ball forward and see where it goes. What becomes interesting with this is with the Xiaomi, they have committed to another $7 billion in funding for their in-house chips, so in-house processors. So they've created this processor, so they've created a number of systems on chip at this point in time. They've come out with this XRING 01 processor, and they're putting $7 billion more into creating processors as we go forward, which again becomes that whole question of what are things going to look like in another couple of years. Now, the thing that comes up is I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say because I said it. I had the lived experience. Who the fuck cares about Xiaomi and their piece of shit ARM processor? Is that what you were thinking? Don't worry, I was thinking it too, because I'm a good American. If China Man does something, the first thing you do is denigrate it, of course. They didn't create something original. It's just some IP ripoff piece of crap, right? And that's the thing. So with the ARM processors, again, if you deal with an Intel processor, Celeron still, I think Celerons are still around. Celeron, Atom, whatever, the i9, i7, i9, i5 processors, the Xeon processors, right? Basically, those are all designed by Intel and more or less fabbed by a manufacturer by Intel. It gets really confusing right now. So there's a company that designs the CPU, and then there's something called fabs. And so fabs is where the CPUs are actually fabricated. So the big thing with Intel for God knows how many years, how many decades, is that they design their processors and they fab their processors. Going into 2025 and the current disaster that is Intel, where that whole design fab thing currently perfectly sits, I don't really want to go into because it is a bit of a mess, but just think about it this way. The idea here, Intel designs their processors and they fab their processors. Horseshoes, hand grenades, it's good enough for this particular story. So the idea is with ARM, that they're a British company. They've been around for quite a while. They were purchased by SoftBank. I do believe they IPO'd. Or haven't they IPO'd a little while ago? Anyways, they're a British company. And basically their idea is that they simply design a CPU architecture. And so the idea is that they design a CPU architecture and then companies are able to license those designs. They are able to tweak those designs a little bit. And then they send those tweaked designs to a fab such as, or basically at this point, is TSMC. So ARM designs the architecture, right? Systems or the processor. Apple, whatever, Motorola, those types of companies, they license those designs, they modify those licenses, they send them to TSMC to be manufactured. And so this was a big thing, back in like the 2010 timeframe when people wanted to put silicon into smartphones, right? Because basically Intel ceded the entire market to ARM. So ARM processors back then sucked ass. They were horrible, but they were power efficient. They were slow and janky and very power efficient. So you had a smartphone. People did not expect them to be gaming machines back then. They did want their battery to last a while. And so ARM basically had an architecture that allowed companies to be able to design off of that to create processors that were good for their smartphones. Intel was like, hey, we're making so much money off of Xeon processors, we don't give a damn. And so they just kind of whiffed on the entire market. They did try to come out with what were called the Atom processors afterwards. Atom processors never took off. Again, one of those things to think about, like with first mover advantages and companies that were behemoths and then die, is for some reason, sometimes they can't pivot. Again, it's weird. Like, again, I'm almost 50. I'm like a month and a half off of 49, getting really close to 50. I'll just say 49. My wife doesn't like when I say 50. Anyways, what's really weird at this point in time is how many of those behemoths I've seen just die. Again, the AOLs of the world, the MySpace of the world, the Research in Motion of the world, the Yahoos of the world. Like, again, they were at the peak. And then, they just need to do a little something to stay in the lead. And then they just don't do it. They just, for whatever reason, they can't. And again, one of the fascinating things about Intel is how they just screw the pooch. Again, coming up with the Atom processor, again, they were like the #1 CPU company in the world. Coming up with the Atom processor should not have been that big a deal. They should have just come out with an Atom processor, stomped the fuck out of ARM, and walked away with the market. That is not what happened. They were not able to do the Atom processors. They failed 5G modems. They couldn't do 5G modems for Christ's sakes. What? That doesn't even make sense. On top of, Intel being Intel. Anyways, so basically the idea is Intel stagnated. Right? It just stagnated probably about 10 years ago, at least to this point. And the curious thing about ARM is ARM kept getting better and better and better and better and better and better. And so more and more companies started licensing the designs for ARM, tweaking them a little bit and having TSMC manufacture the processors for them. This really, the penultimate event happened when Apple went over to ARM processors. So Apple basically, again, licenses the intellectual property for ARM processors. They do a hell of a lot of tweaking to those ARM processors, and that's what gives us, $3,000 MacBook Pros and iPhones and the rest of it, right? And so a lot of these companies are using ARM processors. So some of the companies, again, are doing lots and lots and lots of modifications, real massive improvements, such as Apple. Other companies are doing a tweak here and there, and then slapping their name on it and going on their way. And that's kind of what I figured what was going on with Xiaomi. It was like, okay, well, Xiaomi, got the latest designs from ARM. They tweaked it a little bit, maybe gave it a little bit more caching performance or, whatever in order to improve some specs, slapped it into their new phone, and now they say they have the greatest processor around. The curious thing is, though, that's not actually what happened. And when you look more into the whole thing with ARM licensing and designing ARM processors, it also becomes a much more interesting question, again, about the progress of the Chinese technology industry going into the future. Because again, like when we look at something, like when you look at a technology object, it's very easy just to look at that object and think of that object as the thing, right? If a normal person looks at a computer, they go pewter. Whereas you, as a real technology professional, you go, well, there's a CPU, and there's RAM, and there's storage, and there's a network stack, blah, 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 right? All these components come together to create a computer. The curious thing is, when you look at a processor, right, that pewter is kind of the metaphor for the processor. There's actual cores in the processor, there are caching routines in the processor, there's the interconnects for the processor. So that processor itself is actually made up of a huge number of different components that gives you that processor. And what it appears now is that for Xiaomi, what they did when they created their system on a chip is they did license from ARM the processor, so the Cortex cores. So this is the main cores of the CPU, but then they say they designed everything else. So here's the thing. Again, if you're arguing that China is a backwater, I don't know how you're arguing that in 2025. It's amusing. I see these jackasses in the comment section like, all the Chinese people, all they can do is copy. Like, no. That's obviously not true. But anyways, that's the thing, right? If you think all Chinaman is doing is they're simply licensing ARM processors and then having somebody else manufacture those ARM processors, then it's very easy to put the story onto the Chinaman that really they're simply a backward people that have learned how to profit off of the intellect of the rest of the Western world. Right? And if you have that mindset, if you have the story about China, then you're probably going to think AI diffusion rules and the rest of this horse crap are gonna work. If you understand a goddamn thing about the technology industry and how any of this stuff works, and you realize, oh, they designed everything else about that system on a chip other than the cores. What does that mean? That means they do not have the technical aptitude to design the cores, but they do have the technical aptitude to design everything else. If they already have the technical aptitude to design everything else, they just have to figure out the cores, then literally all they have to do is figure out the cores. I hate to say all they have to do is figure out the cores. It takes a bigger brain than me. But figuring out a core design, right, that's not exactly the mountain that it might initially seem. And so this is interesting. I don't know. Did I bring this up? Xiaomi refutes claims of using ARM-designed chip for XRING 01, highlights research and development effort. Xiaomi's first smartphone chip uses ARM's Cortex cores, leading to speculation that it was using a customized solution from the British firm, right? Chinamen don't invent anything new, they just copy other people. Is a really good story to denigrate a group of people you're really scared of actually having to compete with. Again, what happens when you're trying to compete with a group of people that don't even recognize that you're there? Just a question I'll put on the table. Xiaomi has clarified that its advanced 3nm XRING 01 system on a chip is not a customized solution from ARM, pushing it back against speculation as a Chinese smartphone maker seeks to design its own integrated circuits in-house to rival industry leaders Apple, Samsung, and Huawei. Quote, XRING 01 SoC is not based on a complete solution provided by ARM, and claims about it being an ARM customized chip are groundless. Xiaomi said on Monday the company emphasized that its in-house team spent more than 4 years developing the 3nm chip. Again, that's the other thing to be thinking about with this, again, as we do the whole AI diffusion rules and the rest of it. Again, if China is flat-footed, if China has not been moving forward on chip design in any way, shape, or form, and we try to kneecap their ass, that is going to keep them back further than if they're already working on their own technologies. They were just kind of muddling along because they didn't figure there was any real reason to have to go faster, right? Again, if you're already, right, if you're in bed, right, if you're in bed and you're in your pajamas and you're not even awake yet, and then somebody tells you to go run a race, right? Gotta get out, gotta take a shower, right? It's gonna take you a while before you can start running, right? If you're already in your running shorts and your running shoes, and you're already figuring that you're gonna do a little jog this morning, and then somebody tells you to do a race, you just go, oh, well, then go on a race, right? Anyways. So again, the thing with this is they've already spent 4 years developing for the 3nm chip. The XRING 01 uses ARM's Cortex X925, Cortex A725, and Cortex A520 cores, but the company has stressed that other parts of the chip were designed in-house. It did not use ARM's compute subsystems, a pre-validated production-ready set of integrated hardware and software components meant to simplify design. Among the different licenses offered by ARM are options for modified chips that use ARM's Cortex cores, or licensing only ARM's instruction set architecture, similar to Apple, which designs the cores for its A and M series chips. Rumors swirled around which process Xiaomi was using when it was found that ARM's website described the Chinese firm as using custom silicon, which the company defines as ICs tailored to specific customer applications, distinct from general-purpose chips. ARM does not directly offer customized SoCs, and on Monday, the UK-based company updated the page to say Xiaomi's chips was, quote, self-developed silicon built on ARM Cortex Central Processing Unit, Cluster Intellectual Property, ARM Immortalis Graphics Processing Unit IP, and Core Link Interconnect System IP. Quote, with the XRING team's excellent backend and system-level design, the XRING 01 delivers fantastic performance and efficiency, ARM said. Because, of course, ARM is going to say that. Do remember, Xiaomi is buying the intellectual property of ARM. So ARM isn't going to be like, well, their product's kind of shit, actually. Just to point that one out there. ARM issued the clarification after Xiaomi released a statement seeking to debunk the rumors. Xiaomi stressed that the multi-core and memory access system designs, as well as back-end physical implementations, were entirely developed by the XRING team. Development of the chip required hundreds of upgrades, as Xiaomi said. For instance, the XRING 01 team redesigned more than 480 standard CPU cell libraries and employed novel edge power supply techniques and internally developed high-speed registers, according to the company. Quote, this is our first flagship SoC, and there will inevitably be room for improvement, Xiaomi said in a statement. However, we remain committed to chip development, no matter whether it takes 5, 10, or 20 years. So again, wherever the U.S. might be in this particular race in 2025, where do you think it's going to be in 2030? 2035, 2040, or 2045. Do you think this is a race that we have any chance in winning? The XRING 01 is fabricated by TSMC, as mainland Chinese foundries currently lack the capability to mass produce 3nm chips due to U.S. imposed technology restrictions. Like most other smartphone vendors, Xiaomi has traditionally relied heavily on chips from fabless semiconductor firms, Qualcomm and MediaTek. So this is a 3nm chip. So whenever we talk about the nanometer, it's the size, how small these little transistors are. So again, there are 10nm and 7nm and 5nm, 3nm. I think they're trying to work on 2 nanometer right now. So this is using the 3 nanometer. So TSMC is able to do this. In China, currently they're not able to do 3 nanometer because they are not able to purchase the hardware that would allow them to do that lithography. But again, as they move forward, as their companies move forward with the ability to produce hardware that's able to do more and more things, it will be curious to see how long it is until they can do 3 nanometer processors. Again, one of the big things right now with the Huawei, the Huawei AI chips that have come out is basically the big argument for the Huawei chips is that they're not as power efficient as NVIDIA. That is not good enough in my concern, in my feeling, right? If we're trying to beat China, and you say the flagship NVIDIA GPU is 10 times faster than Huawei's AI chip, that makes me feel good. I'll be like, yeah, fuck you, China man, right? If you say it's 5 times faster than Huawei's, I'm like, right? Knowing the speed of development cycles, Huawei might be able to catch up. But it's still 5x. Okay, China man, respect to you, but I still think you're going to be eating our dust. Right? If it's 2x slower, 1x, you're like, that's going to make me a little nervous. If literally what you're saying is NVIDIA's GPUs are of this quality, and the difference between NVIDIA GPUs and Huawei GPUs is that Huawei GPUs use more electricity. If that is the differentiator. I'm not saying it's not a differentiator. Again, it's real in the real world when you've got tens of thousands of these damn things powered up. But that doesn't make me sleep well at night as an American man. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, ooh, wow, that's a moat that China will not be able to surmount. So anyways, what'll become interesting here is, so you have Xiaomi and you have these other chip companies that are designing chips. So they're using the intellectual property of ARM, right, to give them a base of some sort. They're using the fabs of TSMC in Taiwan in order to produce the chips. And this is giving them the overall experience to keep pushing their industries ahead, with the whole question of, again, where does this lead in a couple of years? I do not feel it leads to U.S. supremacy. I will just put that one on the table. So it is. It's kind of interesting to see how all of this is fleshing out. And again, like technology and geopolitics, how this all comes together, and to see politicians purposely try to prop up certain sectors, certain industries, certain companies, as they purposely try to push down other sectors, other companies, other countries. Again, you had Biden's CHIPS Act, right? You know, Intel got tens of billions of dollars in order to reshore silicon production in the United States. And with that, they laid off 20,000 employees, 21,000 employees. Yeah, I can't make that shit up. Government's like, here's tens of billions of dollars. And Intel's like, thank you, you're fired. Like, what? No, but I'm not sure what the plan was there. I just don't think that was what was supposed to be in the plan, right? But that's the reality, right? Again, it's interesting to see this. Again, it's interesting to see, like, as America tries to stunt Chinese growth in the technology industry, not just how they're saying no. Again, that's normal. Okay, they have their own universities, they have their own manufacturing capacity, they're going to do what they're going to do. But also to see how they're using resources from around the world that they do have access to keep moving the ball forward. Again, using British resources, using Taiwanese resources, using these other resources in order to keep pushing their ball forward. And then again, the interesting thing is what happens when their vision is simply to push the ball forward. Again, what happens when U.S. industry is focused? The only way they will improve things in any way, shape, or form is because of competition. And then what if you have a different mindset of they're going to improve things just because they think they should be improved. Again, on a society level, who do you think's going to probably win that particular argument? Yeah, I don't know. Some things to think about. Some things to ponder. I'm not sure we can buy Xiaomi phones here in the United States for one reason or another. So I don't know. I have no idea. Again, as far as the processor itself, who the hell knows? Again, I dislike the whole, like the processor thing, especially on the consumer level. Again, whether it's GPUs or whether it's smartphones. I'm not sure how much this really matters for most of us at the end of the day. Again, I have an iPhone 14. I forget why I bought the iPhone 14. I think there is a reason about the iPhone 14. Anyways, I have an iPhone 14. So it's like 3 years old at this point. I don't care. It doesn't really make a difference to me. Again, when Apple comes out with their latest flagship processor, again, another interesting thing is how much does that practically matter? Again, an interesting thing for me with all this, with this conversation, again, about society and technology, is at what point does the efficiency of deployment become more of a value versus efficiency in better quality product, right? Because again, as I've argued before, like our computers have basically been good enough for a decade at this point. And I'm not too snarky on that. Again, the processors and everything else have been fine enough. One of the things that I found interesting is that we're not deploying IoT more. Again, like IoT is now a footnote. Talk about things that were the future and now are kind of sort of footnotes, right? It's interesting that we're not using, inexpensive, more computer devices in order to do more things basically within our lives. And that would become an interesting thing, like on a societal level. And you start hearing this from China, from other countries, where they're actually deploying more technology into people's actual lived lives. Right? If you can deploy more technology that people are actually using, even if technically it's a couple of years behind, if it's actually being used, does that put them into a better position? I don't know. This is the stuff I ponder. Do you have a Xiaomi? Do you know anything about the XRING 01 processor that has come out? What do you think about this? What do you think about the United States trying to keep the China man down? The China man going, what? Did somebody say something? Is that old white guy up on the hill? Is he screaming at us? Is he asking for help? Hey Lee. Yeah, you see that old white guy up on the hill? Yeah, he's screaming. Do you think he needs help? Or is he telling us to stop? I don't know. I'm kind of hungry. You want some lunch? Yeah, I want some lunch too. What happens when we just turn in that old white man on the hill? Nobody's really not sure what the hell we're screaming about. And then they just realize they're hungry. And so they just go off in a different direction, get some lunch. Inquiring minds would like to know. Anyways, put your thoughts down below. With that, see y'all later.